Hello everyone. Today we're going to be starting ecology, and the focus for today is how basically what are the components of an ecosystem. Before we get started on today's topic though, I want to put this picture up here of our planet, just as a reminder that we are all connected. So we all live in a global ecosystem, and we are all sharing one planet, one home, with all the other organisms that exist on Earth. And even though a lot of the times we feel disconnected from this as humans because we consider ourselves more advanced, um, whatever we do as a species ultimately will affect all other species on Earth that we are sharing this ecosystem with. So this is what we mean here by we are living in a global ecosystem above all. And a lot of the times, when occurrences happen, such as what's going on right now with the whole coronavirus situation, we are reminded of just how connected we are, not just to each other, but also to other organisms that we share this planet with. So it was something as little as they're hypothesizing what a bat, so something as little as a bat, this very simple, maybe insignificant organism that lives across the world from us, was able to spread a virus that then affected our species and ultimately has had tremendous effects on the human health as a collective, uh, the human economy, right, financial, and just our daily day-to-day lives have been affected by a microorganism, a virus that was spread possibly from an organism as simple as a bat. So, again, what I'm trying to say here is that we are all connected. We are all sharing this one ecosystem. And what happens in one population or one species that is present in this ecosystem will impact other species that are also sharing the same ecosystem. Now, by the end of today's lesson, you should be able to define what an ecosystem is and identify the different energy sources that could be present in the ecosystem. You should be able to determine the role of producers as well as consumers and decomposers in a particular food web or energy pyramid. And we'll talk more about what food webs and energy pyramids are in our next lesson. But for today, we want to focus on what producers, consumers, and decomposers are and how they could potentially play a role in ecosystems. Now, ecology, if we had to define what that kind of study is, we could break it down into the two parts, right? Eco and ology. So the word eco here refers to basically anything that deals with the environment that surrounds us. So ecology is then the study of relationships between organisms and their environment, as well as the balances between these relationships. Because like I said, since we are all connected, sometimes if one thing happens to one species in an ecosystem or in an environment, this drastically will affect other species, other organisms as well. Now, if we had to define what is an ecosystem is a community of living organisms that interact with each other as well as their non-living environment. So not only are these organisms interacting with each other on a day-to-day basis, of course they're also interacting with the non-living parts of their environment. So when we're talking about what makes up an ecosystem, we look at two different parts. So to be more scientific, an ecosystem is composed of biotic and abiotic factors. And biotic factors, let's just look at the word right now. The word biotic contains the prefix bio, all right? And we all know that bio means life, okay? So anything that is living, basically we study it in biology, the study of living things. So biotic are essentially living factors such as plants, animals, fungi, bacteria. Any organism that is alive, they fall under the category of biotic factors. Abiotic factors, that A at the front there, means non, okay? So abiotic, non-living factors. So this would include things like water, sunlight, soil, air, temperature, any non-living thing or component that is found in the environment that an organism lives in. Now, when we're talking about organisms, obviously there are thousands and millions of organisms that exist on our planet. And in order for scientists to understand them and study them better, they grouped them into different kingdoms, they call them. So the kingdoms of life. The first kingdom is the kingdom of protists. And this includes things like protozoas and algae. And these are essentially microscopic organisms that usually live in aquatic environments. And we already mentioned this before when we were talking about pathogens. Some protists are pathogenic, so they do cause disease. But for the most part, they're usually harmless. The second kingdom is the kingdom of the monerans. And this includes bacteria, so the bacteria that we know of, right? The prokaryotic bacteria, and also a very specialized form of bacteria known as archaea bacteria, which we've kind of discussed in the past. And we said that archaea bacteria are the types of bacteria that live in extremely harsh environments on our planet. So one classic example is specific types of archaea bacteria that live in this, as you can see, hot springs, right? So these hot springs, this is a specific hot spring that is found in Yellowstone, I believe in Wyoming in the United States. And these hot springs are extremely hot, right? The temperatures are extremely unbearable, like you couldn't go down and swim in them. And you would expect that no form of life would exist in something as hot as a hot spring. However, the archaea bacteria have evolved the ability to sustain high amounts of heat, high amounts of salt, just like any form of harsh environment that you can think of. They have evolved mechanisms to be able to survive in them. Another cool fact is that these are the fact that, or if you can see here, the hot springs have beautiful kind of gradient of colors, and this is actually caused by the presence of these archaea bacteria. The next kingdom is the kingdom of fungi, or fungi, depending on how you want to pronounce it. And again, we kind of talked about the fact that some types of fungi are parasitic, right? Or not parasitic, pathogenic, meaning they can cause disease. But a lot of them are actually, edible, such as mushrooms, or very useful for us as humans, such as yeast, when we use them to make things like bread and other forms of our diet. Okay, next we have the kingdom of plants, and we already talked about the fact that plants are categorized into angiosperms, gymnosperms, mosses, and ferns. And finally, we have the kingdom of animals, which, we can see several examples of organisms that fall under this category or kingdom right here. Okay, now, where does all this energy that sustains these organisms come from? So definitely there has to be some form of energy that is keeping all of these organisms alive, right? And if we had to really narrow it down to its simplest form, all the energy on Earth, all the energy that is found in, all living things on this planet starts from the sun. Without the sun, life would not be able to exist on Earth, right? So basically, we have the sun, and we have specific types of organisms which we know of, called producers, such as plants. These organisms then use the process of photosynthesis in order to capture the sunlight and convert it into sugar. And we already talked about photosynthesis and all of its details. So this sugar that is made by the producers is then consumed by other organisms, which allows basically life to exist on our planet. Now let's focus on producers. Producers are also known as autotrophs, and these are basically organisms that have the ability to make their own food. They can do that in their cells. So usually this food is in the form of glucose. And there's two ways that organisms can do that. Most likely they will use, or the majority of producers will use photosynthesis. So things like aquatic plants, cyanobacteria, and just the general types of plants that you see day to day. These are going to be these are going to be using photosynthesis to produce their energy. Keep in mind that it's not just plants that are producers, right? So something like cyanobacteria, a type of bacteria, is still considered a producer, even though it's a bacteria, because it does basically utilize the sun's energy to make its own food. It does undergo photosynthesis. Some of you might be wondering, well, what about a plant such as the Venus flytrap, right? The Venus flytrap, we already know, is a carnivorous plant. Let's take a look at how the Venus flytrap actually captures its food.
This fly has to tread carefully. If it strikes one hair, it can carry on feeding, but a timer has been set. A second strike in less than 20 seconds, and the fly is doomed.
So that was pretty cool, right? These types of plants, the Venus flytrap in particular, is a carnivorous plant, and we kind of talked about the Venus flytrap before. But just because it's carnivorous, it does not mean that it's not considered a producer. It still undergoes photosynthesis to make sugar, but it consumes insects as a way to collect nutrients that it lacks in the soil that it lives in. So basically, the Venus flytrap uses both methods. It consumes the insects for their nutrients, but it also undergoes photosynthesis in order to make sugar. The next category of organisms we want to talk about are consumers, which are also known as heterotrophs. And we are considered consumers. Animals are considered consumers. These are organisms that they can't make their own food, so they have to actually obtain it by eating other organisms, okay? So obviously, when we're talking about consumers, because there's different types of consumers, we put them in different categories. So in terms of in the study of ecology, we have different categories of consumers. So we have primary consumers, secondary consumers, and tertiary consumers. So what's the difference between these levels or these categories? Basically, the primary consumer feeds on a producer. So for example, here we have a grasshopper, okay, which is a primary consumer, and it's considered a primary consumer because it feeds on grass, okay? So it consumed the grass, and since the grass is a producer, then the grasshopper is considered a primary consumer. The frog, which feeds on the grasshopper, is considered a secondary consumer, while the hawk, which feeds on the frog, is considered a tertiary consumer. So it kind of goes into that order, but whatever organism feeds on a producer is considered a primary consumer, okay? Next we have decomposers, which are extremely important organisms. Decomposers, their main role is to recycle all the nutrients that exist, and especially in dead organisms, back into the ecosystem. So this whole cycle of life continues, all right? Nothing is wasted in our in our ecosystems. Nothing is wasted. Even an organism that has died, its nutrients and its all the important things that were present, such as carbon, nitrogen, etc., that were present in the organism's body, get recycled back into the earth so that they could be used by plants to undergo photosynthesis, which kind of restarts the whole cycle of life, all right? So some examples of decomposers include fungi, earthworms, and bacteria. Now, to highlight just how important decomposers are in our ecosystem, let's look at a specific example. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Chernobyl disaster that happened in Russia in 1986, but basically what happened was a nuclear power plant exploded, which leaked radioactive material all into the atmosphere and into the ecosystem surrounding the power plant. Many countless organisms were killed. Some of them were mutated. Those who survived were mutated, and many were killed. One of the organisms, or one of the group of organisms that were killed by this explosion, were decomposers. So I want you to look at this picture down here, okay? So what do we see? We basically see trees, right, which look like they have fallen down. We have the bark of the tree remaining. What if I told you that this picture, or these trees, are the exact same trees that existed after the explosion in 1986? In other words, these trees have not decomposed, all right? Since the decomposers were killed in this area, nothing was recycled back onto the earth. These trees remained exactly the way that they looked like in 1986. So this kind of just shows us how important decomposers are. Imagine our planet without them, okay? Any organism that dies, plant or animal, would just remain there. They would not go. They would not disappear back into the soil. And, that would cause lots of terrible things, such as diseases and just overpopulation of these, dead organisms that aren't unnecessary to be there anymore. So it really gets you thinking of how important decomposers are. Like I said at the beginning, we are all connected, right? Our impact as a species, as humans, really does affect all other organisms around us. And again, this is a perfect example to leave you with today with the Chernobyl disaster, the power plant explosion that happened in 1986. On that note, that's it for today's lesson. We're going to be continuing with the next topic next class. Make sure you complete the assignment that follows this video, please, and see you next time.